Today in our workshop, we are going to take a look at setting up our workflow template. So it's our second part of it. In our last session, we took a look at core configurations and some of the things you might want to have turned on, as well as a little bit about workflow within FileHold and some of the tools. Today we're going to take a much deeper dive into one of the aspects, which is actually setting up our templates. Workflow and FileHold is a template-based process. So that means that we're always using our documents to put them through. We're not treating them separately on that, but it's a template-based. So you could have the same steps each time. We create the template, we associate that template with a schema, we run the workflow on a document or documents in that schema. Now, schema can have one or many associated workflow templates. So we could have one workflow that gets associated with that in a template. We could have multiples. We can also have multiple schemas with the same workflow template and therefore multiple documents from different schemas all put through a single workflow process. As long as the workflow template is associated with the schema, then a document in that schema can go into that workflow. So today we're going to take a look at an invoice approval use case. No, it's not the most dynamic thing in the world, but it's rock solid. Everyone will be able to follow along with this. We all know what invoices are. So let's just talk about what our process is going to be. We're going to start with our invoice coming in. It's going to be a front-end person, an office manager is the person going to be receiving that. They then need to deal with that invoice when it comes in. So they're going to send it along over to the accounting team. Accounting wants to look at it. They want to make sure it's a valid document. They want to attach a purchase order number to it for the company's reference. From there, they're going to send it over to the manager who's responsible for that particular purchase order so that they can approve it and say, yes, this is a legitimate invoice expense, or we received the goods, or we're good to move forward with it. From there, we're going to send it over to our CFO. CFO will then do their approval. And to wrap it up, we're going to send it back to our accounting team, and the accountant will then, fill out some of the information onto it and remit payment. So those are going to be our key steps in our process. Now, from a breakdown, what that means is our first participant is going to be an office manager. They're going to be submitting the received invoice. Our accounting team is going to be attaching the PO to it. Our manager is going to be approving the expense. Our CFO will be signing off on it for the approving the final payment. And then finally, accounting will remit that payment. Now, in FileHold terms, what that looks like, we have workflow roles that we're going to be associating with this. I introduced this in the last session, and here's where we're going to be applying them. So our office manager is going to be initiator, and their workflow activity is none. They're not actually part of the workflow once they started off. So they started in the process, and then they don't really have any further role with it. The participant in the accounting will be a participant with this. Now, our participant in this case is not going to be an individual. It's going to be a team. It's going to be a group of people who are going to be receiving the invoice, and I only need one of them to complete it. And I'll show you how we're going to configure that later on. And they're going to be acting as a reviewer. We're not asking them to sign off on this. We're asking them to do a task, and we'll show you the difference between a review task and an approval task as we go through our workflow template. The manager will also be a participant because they're going to be doing an approval of the expense, so therefore they're going to be an approver. They're signing off on this. They're going to be putting their e-signature onto this to say, yes, this is me and I did this. The CFO is going to be both a participant and an observer. As a CFO, they might want to have visibility into all workflow processes, whether they're part of it or not. Now, normally they would be, but I want to set them as an observer onto this, and I'll show you where we do that. And with their actual task, let me set as an observer into there. And then finally, our accounting team, even though we've already seen them before, will again be a participant in this. And in this case, again, just a reviewer. They're not signing off on it. They're just completing a task. So in that context, let's dive into our FileHold environment and let's start working this through. Now, where did I put that window? There it is. Perfect. All right, let's get our FileHold up here. And I'm just going to do a quick refresh. I'm doing a refresh here because FileHold security will log me out after a period of time, just like it did there. So I'm just going to refresh it to make sure that my system is awake. Here we are. So we're using the web client for FileHold today. Everything I'm going to do today, you can absolutely do in the desktop application. I just prefer to use the web client because I think it puts more information on the screen and we can all see what's there. Let's make that just slightly bigger so that if you have a smaller monitor, you can see what I've got over in your workspace. Perfect. So here's our FileHold environment. Let's go ahead and head over to our workflow templates. We do that by going up to administration and our workflow management and workflow templates. And this will give us a list of all of our current templates. Now, don't worry about the ones that are here. Most of these are testing ones that I've done in my environment. We're going to go ahead and we're going to build out our workflow. And because I've already taken the time to map out what I want it to have, I can just refer back to that document to figure out who's going to be doing our activities. And the first thing I had written down there was the office manager as the initiator. So there's actually nothing for them to do in the workflow itself. I don't need to consider them for the template. Instead, they're going to be initiating it, so we can start with creating our template by name. And in this case, we're just going to call it invoice approval. It's a workflow name, so I can identify it's what I want it to be. This is not an invoice reconciliation. This isn't an invoice, a query. This is an invoice approval. That's the activity that I'm doing. I can give these processes a custom name if I would like to. So in this case, I'm going to go up here to custom naming. We're going to select that, and I can put a custom name on it. I really like to put a custom name on my workflow templates because if I have 20 different invoice approval activities, and if all they say is invoice approval, it can become really a challenge for me to figure out which of my invoices is the most important one, which one am I looking at, which one am I working with. So I just want to make my life as easy as possible, and I'm going to give these a custom name. And I'm going to be very basic with this. I could be elaborate, but we'll go simple today. So for my first one here, first I got to turn this on, so automatically rename. Once that's activated, I can use my drop downs. And the first I'm going to choose is workflow name. Hey, invoice approval is full of information. So I want to keep that into there because it's invoice approval. What am I asking them to approve? Well, just to be simple about it, I could choose one of my metadata fields, but I'm just going to choose the document name, which is right here. So here's the document, and it's invoice approval, document name. Very simple. Everyone can see it. And I'll even keep the underscore in between it because I don't need to make any changes to this. Good. So we'll say OK to that. I've now given this a name. In our workflow template screen, this top section here is our controls over the total workflow template that we're building. Most of this I will come back and talk about later. I might talk about this in the next session to get some of these finer details. There are some of them here we will briefly mention today. But what I do want to focus on before I add anything to this is this last column over here. You'll see it's in a darker gray. It's even more dark in the desktop application version. So if you're using that, you'll see quite a difference there. And this is allow initiator to define. I can make my templates entirely set up so nobody can make any changes to it. And that's ideal for certain controlled processes I need to run something through. For example, if I have an ISO certification standard that I'm looking to achieve for my review processes, I probably don't want a lot of interpretation to that or a lot of changes. However, I can also make these a bit more flexible by allowing the initiator to define what I want these tasks to be. So anytime I use this checkbox, it means that the person who initiates the workflow can make changes to it. So for example, I could allow the initiator to give this a different name if I wanted them to. So if we want to put a different value into it, they can absolutely do that if I want to. But if I want to keep this locked as invoice approval underscore document name, I can turn that off. We're going to see these checkboxes throughout. Just when you see the checkbox, just remember it's an allow initiator to define checkbox. Okay, we're now going to add an activity to our workflow. Again, we'll come back and look at some of these configurations later. So we're going to add an activity, click there, and a new window is opened up down below here. Now, by default, when we set up a new activity for it, it's going to be an approval activity. All activities in workflow are either going to be a review activity, asking someone to do something, or an approval activity, asking someone to approve or reject something. So the key difference is, one, how we define it by our task description. I'll come to that in a moment. Or two, the asking the user to enter their password. I know there's often a question of what is the importance of having the password into there. The password forms the e-signature part of this. So if I'm asking someone to approve it and they enter their password, they're signing off against this. I have a record that they have agreed to this and they're going to move forward. I also get them to put their password in if they reject it because I want them to sign off that they've rejected it. So I get that e-signature either way. Our first task, if you remember, is to go to the accounting team, and the accounting team will be attaching a purchase order number to this. So therefore, our first activity is going to be a review task, and we select that. Now you'll notice that I sometimes scroll up to the top here. We're going to see that a little bit when it refreshes the page, so it brings it up a little bit. That's okay. I don't mind doing a little bit of scrolling up and down. We'll see that throughout today. If I'm using the desktop application, I don't see that because it moves up and down. I also see that my review activities are in a lavender color and my approval activities are in a yellow color. So you can see that there's going to be a color coding difference here. We don't see that in the web client, but that's no problem. All right, we have a few different sections here. We always must give a title to this. And here, our first one here is I'm going to give this a summary of the activity. It's going to be to attach a purchase order. So that's what I'm asking the person to do when they get in with this. It's not a complete set of instructions, but it gives me a little bit of information to this as to what I'm going to allow the person to do to the document. Description is optional. I'm not going to be using any of these today. You can feel free to use them if you want to, but if you say, no, it's too much hassle, I don't want to bother, I believe you. But description is an optional thing you can put into here. Reviewers. Now this is where I'm asking who's going to be part of this task. And I have 3 different paths that I can take on this. The first path is I can use the person who started the workflow or owns the document. And those are our 2 checkboxes down here. So if I include document version owner, it doesn't matter who owns the document, it means it's going to them. Well, my person who owns the document is the office manager because they're the person who's added the document into here. They are not appropriate as the person to select for this. My second one is include workflow initiator. That's again the office manager. They are not authorized to do this. So this is not an appropriate option to select. My second option is I can name a person, and I can do that with my 3 dots over here. So clicking on that opens up a list of my available groups. We can see my different groups, and we can see my available users. So I could say that I want Sally to be the person on this. So I can add Sally to this, and now Sally is the named person on this. If I click OK, it means that Sally's name will be attached to this as the person who's involved. But Sally's a different person than this. Sally's not the appropriate person for me to be using for this activity, so I'm actually going to remove Sally from this. Instead, I could add Matt into this and say that Matt is going to be my accounting person, so I'm going to get them to do that work. So I can add Matt into here. But there's a challenge with this. I don't really care who on my accounting team does this, so long as it gets done. I want one of my accounting team to do this. So instead of choosing an individual, I'm going to choose a group. So I'm going to select my accounting admin and my accounting users group, both of whom are people who could potentially do this task for me. And we're going to add those 2 groups. Now, anybody who's a member of these groups will be getting this task. And I'm setting it up this way so that I can make sure that somebody in accounting is taking care of this. And I'm going to say OK to that. Good. And then we can we'll see that they're now, scroll down here. So accounting admin, accounting user are now listed to here. The third option, by the way, is to use the allow initiator to define. I'm setting up a template. At the template level, I may not know who the best participant is as a reviewer or as an approver. So therefore, I might select this so that the person who's starting the workflow elects those roles. So they choose those people ad hoc when they go. It allows me to define that. Very useful in many, many use cases. So just because I'm not using it here in this case, I don't want to minimize this. I love this option because it allows me to allow the initiator, the person starting the workflow, to actually make that designation. So we're not going to use this here, but nice to know that it's available. We then have some options. The first option here is one of X, and this is something that I want to use. If I send a task to one person, I have one participant who needs to complete the task before we move to the next activity. So our task process, our activity process in this is linear. We're going to go from activity 1 to activity 2 to activity 3, etc. If I have 5 people involved in activity 1, I need 5 people to complete that activity before we go to 2. In some cases, I don't need every participant to complete the activity. I only need one of them to do it. And in this case, I don't care who on my accounting team actually processes the invoice, so long as the invoice gets processed, as long as that PO number gets attached to it. So therefore, I'm going to choose one of X. I need one person out of that team to take care of this. Forced reservation is only available when it's a one of X task. And because it is a one of X task, I'm going to select that. That means that whoever says, yes, I'm going to do this, the first thing that they need to do is reserve the activity. They say, yes, I'm the participant into this. And so they're going to reserve it. And I can force them to do that. So they can't start on the task until they reserve it. That way, if I send this task to 20 people, I don't want 5 people working on it at the same time. I only need one of them to do it. So let's flag to the others that, hey, this is being worked on. Now in my case here, I only have 2 people in that accounting department. It's still a nicety because all you have to do is click a button. And I'll show that to you in our next session as we actually run our workflow through. Allow checkout. Remember in our last session, I enabled the option to allow checkout to be available in the first place. And here I'm not going to select it. I don't want the accounting team to actually change this document or make modifications to them. I just want to allow a check. I don't want to allow a checkout of the document at all. I need them to attach information to it. Remember, in our last session, we allowed them to alter the metadata. So here, that's what I want them to do. So I'm not going to allow them to check it out. That's not required. Require supplemental authentication. Read password. This is where I'm asking them to put their password onto this. I'm going to require that at this point if it's an approval task, and I'm not going to require it if it's a review task. It's not checked and it's grayed out. I can't check this even if I wanted to because I'm not giving people the option of doing a workflow task as a review task with a password. I've turned that off altogether. Convert main documents to PDF, not necessary at this stage. But what's important here is that I can do it at a stage level as opposed to having to wait until the entire workflow is complete. I could convert this to PDF at any point. Not necessary in this case because I'm not looking for that PDF. We will be using this tool when it comes to sign-off sheets. And oftentimes we do that at the end of the process, but it can also be at the moment of approval to get that information attached to it. Next section down is automation. This is empty, so if you open up your automation here, you'll see that there's nothing into there. That's by design. This is meant for sending metadata to an external system upon completion of the activity. So for instance, we could say here, push information from this into my accounting system because the accounting team has looked at it, or I can do that at a later activity. This is empty because how your accounting software is going to need that information packaged is something you'll need to chat with us about, and we do this as a professional service. So it's available, but we're not using it here. Due date. The default for this is always 1 day, 0 hours. And this is the one field that I find most useful to allow to the user to define. Because in some cases, it makes sense for this to be a rush job, that the office manager gets the document and they say, I really need this done quickly, so I'm going to put this at 1 hour until the task is overdue because it's a dead urgency, it needs to happen right away. In other cases, we could say, well, we're going to get this paid out in the next little while, so I'm going to give you 5 days to take care of it. An important detail on this, these are calendar days, not office days. So if I set this at 2 days and assign this to somebody on Friday at 5 p.m., when they come in on Monday morning, it will have already been overdue. So it's another use case where sometimes changing it from days instead to a date and time, which you can do at the initiation phase, again, something we'll talk about in our next session, you could define there. So I often leave the due by defined when I'm not under a regulatory obligation as to how long it takes, so I have some control over that. For today, we're just going to leave this at 2 days as the default. Then finally, task instructions. We want to put our task instructions here for what we're asking people to do. So please review the invoice and attach PO number to the metadata field. If I have a metadata field for my purchase order number, then that's where I can use that and I can take a look at it there. That's everything I need. My first activity is complete. Let's build our second activity. And now we're going to move a little bit quicker through this because we don't need to cover all of the core details each time. So in this case, it's going to the manager to approve the expense. So approve expense. So we're now going to give this an approver. This is going to be a named user in this case. It's always going to go to the same manager. So I'm going to send this over to Matt. So we're going to add Matt as a user into here and say OK. And then we can scroll down. We'll see Matt listed here. We're going to, no reason to make this a 1 of X task because it's only going to Matt. So no point in doing that. We're not allowing him to check it out. And we're not going to convert main document to PDF. I'm going to talk about allow, postpone, approval in our next session. We're going to put a pin in that for now. Suffice to say for now that 100% of your documents in FileHold will have a workflow status that is either approved, not approved, or not submitted for approval if they're not pending approval. But there's a fifth state, which is we can't approve it now, but we will be able to later. We're just holding on it. Or we can't reject it now. We have to wait until later for other reasons. Either of those scenarios where we might use allow, postpone approval. Again, we'll take a deeper dive into that in our next session. We get into some of the advanced features in the setup. Automation, not using it, due date 1 day, that's fine, but again, I will allow the initiator to define. Now I need to put my task instructions. If you're ever wondering what you should put in for task instructions, think of if this was being audited. If someone was coming back and saying, what did this person approve? What did they say they were actually going to do to it? This is where we want the sign off for it. So confirm goods on invoice were received and approve if payment can be made. For all I know, we got the goods, but they were damaged. And so we have a conversation with them. We're going to get a credit for it and get a new invoice. Or maybe the goods haven't been received yet. We're still waiting on the loading dock for it. We're not going to pay this yet. Those are circumstances where allowing the approval postponement might be really useful. We could also be in a situation where it's like, no, we never received these goods. I'm rejecting this invoice. We're not paying it. So again, we could use this tool for that. Lots of ways to do that. But this is what we're actually asking Matt to sign off on. Please confirm the goods were received and approve if a payment can be made. That's the task. And if I later had to call him on the carpet because there was a problem with the invoice, these are the actions I'm going to ask them to defend. This is what they're actually signing off against. Add our next activity into here. And now, again, scroll down. And here we have our CFO. Why can I suddenly not type? There we go. CFO approval. Excellent. And again, for our participant for this one, well, this is going to go to Sally, who is our CFO. So we're going to add Sally as a user and say OK. And again, scroll down. Notice, by the way, I didn't bother changing my types here. These were both approval by default. That's always the default when we start a new activity. It's always going to be an approval activity. We're not going to do one of X. We're not going to allow checkout. We're not going to convert main documents to PDF. There's no reason to do that. Now, by the way, this is the last approval activity. If I wanted a sign-off sheet to be attached to this, this is the logical place where I might do that. And if that was the case, I might convert main document to PDF here, and that's where I might run things through and do my setup for my sign-off sheet. This is going to be a future session. Sign-off sheets are complicated to set up, but once done, they're very easy to manage. So we'll look at the total setup from that from beginning to end in a future DMS workshop. So we'll put a pin in that one for now and not select this. We're going to, again, we're going to say 1 day is the default. We'll check the do by so we can make some changes to that if we need to. And finally, task instructions. Please approve payment for the approved invoice. The invoice has already been stamped off on as approved in the step beforehand. So I want to redefine my task here to say you're approving the payment, not the invoice itself. I'm certain that if there was a problem with the invoice, the CFO would finally look at it and go, what is this? I know the manager signed off on it, but I have doubts about this. So I want to have a further conversation. But again, we're just asking them to approve the payment onto this. So it's it's a secondary approval onto this, and that's why it's its own activity. If I wanted them both to sign off on in the same activity with the same instructions, I could have made this one task. Hey, if you're looking to streamline this, why not make both people participants in this activity? It's because I only want the CFO to see approved invoices. I don't want them, saying, yes, this is good for sign off, and then having the other person say, actually, this isn't a valid invoice, or we haven't received the goods yet. I have to reject your instructions. And so we get into a complicated matter there, and I don't want to worry anyone about that. So we'll leave our please approve payment for the invoice and just keep it on that way. All right, our next activity, we're going to add our fourth activity to this, and again, scroll down to the bottom. And our last one here is remit payment. And again, we're going to be assigning this to our accounting team. So we'll choose both of our accountants. We'll add those two groups. There they are. We'll say OK to that. And then we'll head down here and for our remit payment, we have our people selected there. One of X again, I only need one person to the payment. I don't know who's doing that, but one of X is perfectly good. I don't really need to force the reservation here as much as I did earlier, but I'm still going to use it. We're not going to allow checkout. Notice by default it went approval, and I know that because I have allow postpone approval. I don't want that. I want to change this to review. So worth always double checking to make sure you're in your right activity stage. That's my fault. I forgot to check that earlier, but I saw that flag there. It's like, why is this person allowing a postpone approval? They're only doing a review task. Oh, I didn't change the activity. And that's how we can do that. Nothing set yet. Very still easy to make changes to this. And again, we'll keep the 1 day into here. And finally, we'll just remit payment and close invoice in accounting software. And if you notice how much I love a spell checker, I love a spell checker because I'm a terrible, terrible typist. So I always try to make sure to put my correct things into here. A lovely side benefit of using the web client. Perfect. Now that I've done that, I'm good. Let's just make this also something that can be changed if we want to. Good. We're now happy with this. I'm going to lock this in place by saving it. So we've now saved our template and put it into place. I'm going to cover one very quick thing here with this first box. I will come back and look at some of these other functions in a future video, but for today I just want to look at the observers for this. we have the option to assign somebody as an observer to the workflow. Observers are people who will be able to see the document moving through. Think a manager who will never be a workflow participant. They have no role involved with this, but they might want to see the document moving through the cycle. So I might say, as the president of the company, I'm going to make that myself. I want visibility to all of these, so I'm going to add myself as a user and say OK, and I'm now set as an observer. So even though I'm not directly involved in the workflow, I'm not a participant in it, I can still observe the process as it's moving through and get certain notifications based on certain activities that may have happened. Again, we'll see this briefly in some of the other sessions. I may not sign in as an observer to show you what those notifications are, but again, just want to let you know these are what some of the options are that are available for us here. Our template is now complete. We've finished all of our work on this, so let's go ahead and save that. I'm going to go down here, duplicate template name, please rename workflow template. Oopsie, I already have an invoice approval. So I'm just going to say invoice approval for DMS workshop because of course I tend to do invoice demonstrations quite a bit. So we'll do invoice approval for DMS workshop and now we'll save and we're back to our main screen here. So there's our invoice approval that I had there before, oops, and here's our new one that's already in the system. Notice it has no schemas attached to it. So let's do that next. Let's attach a schema to this particular document. So I can close out my administration window here and then reopen my administration window by going to my document schemas. Now here's a total list of my schemas, including my invoices one over here. Let's go ahead and choose this just so I can show you what the options are. I can scroll down here with workflows associated with this. We'll edit that. And we can say I already have my invoice approval part of this and my test one. So we can have multiple schemas attached to our workflow. So let's go ahead first of all and select our template over here for our available workflows and add to schema. So some of the participants or observers in this workflow you are associated with the schema are not schema members. Until these users are made members of the schema, they will not be able to participate or observe workflows during this template. So what that means is because I have people who are included in this, either Matt or Sally are two of the people I know, or some people on the accounting admin team, they should have visibility to invoices, but they might not. So I'm going to say OK to this for now, just to go back to that screen. Hasn't stopped me from putting this onto here, but I might get an error message if I try to send this out. So before I do anything else, I'm going to go back over here to my membership. I'm going to make sure that Sally is a member of this by adding Sally as a user to this. Now, I should be adding a group. So if I had Sally as a group, then I wanted to add that in there first, but I'm going to do this as a user for today. Not quite best practice, but it'll still work. And I'm going to go back to my workflow. And again, doesn't make any changes, just means it wants me to make sure that I have visibility in my schema to my participants in the workflow. So as with many things with FileHold, I can't use workflow to bypass permissions. If I can't see the document inside of FileHold, then I shouldn't be able to see the document inside of, I won't be able to do workflow participant because I don't have permission to see the cabinet folder or schema for that document. If I can't see one of those, I can't see any of it. Next section down here is auto start. When I add a new document in, what do I want FileHold to do? By default, it's going to start my invoices approval, and I can change that to my invoice approval for DMS workshop. By the way, the reason it only gives you one option there is I can only initiate one workflow at a time per document. So it makes no sense to have more than one selection there. I can only start a singular workflow per document as it's running through. I can also start this workflow when a new document or when checking in a new version of the document is added. So I have additional controls over that. And then finally, hide versions of this document in the schema until the document is approved. The document version using the schema will only be visible if it has been approved in a workflow. The setting should only be used if there's a template associated with the schema with at least one approval activity. So this means that if I add a new document in, and the document has a status of not submitted for approval or pending approval, in either of those two cases, the document will not be visible to the average user. High-level administrators will see it, document owners will see it. To everyone else, that document is hidden because it's going through a workflow. We would use this for an approval process, for instance, with an SOP or something where I need multiple levels of sign-off, but more importantly, I don't want people to see the wrong document. I don't want them to see the wrong thing in the system. So therefore, I'm going to hide the document until it's done. This is an invoice. Let's be reasonable about our context here. I don't care if people see an invoice in the system. I care if it gets paid or not. So I don't need to necessarily hide it, but that's an important function for other users. All right, let's go ahead and save this because I now have this as part of my settings. Excellent. And we can go back to our list over here and we'll go over to our workflow management, workflow templates. And let's take a look at that invoice approval for DMS workshop. And now we can see used in schemas, invoices. So this is now ready to go. I'm now ready to add my first document in and start running it through a workflow process